You have also advocated for the restitution of interrogation methods like waterboarding that have been defined as torture, and you have belittled the advice and counsel of the Judge Advocates General while on deployment. In your book, The War on Warriors, you write, quote, "Should we follow the Geneva Convention? If our warriors are forced to follow rules arbitrarily and asked to sacrifice more lives so that international tribunals feel better about themselves, aren't we just better off in winning our wars according to our own rules?" Mr. Hegseth, I would ask that you explain how you, if confirmed, would maintain good order and discipline within our forces and the support of our allies and partners by rejecting international law and the law of war. I'm also concerned about your abilities as a competent manager of organizations far less complex than the Department of Defense. From 2008 to 2010, you led the organization Veterans for Freedom, which had an annual budget of less than $10 million. In each year you were in charge, expenses far exceeded revenues until the organization teetered on bankruptcy and had to be merged with another group. In fact, according to public reporting, an independent forensic accountant reviewed the organization's finances and discovered evidence of gross financial mismanagement. I would note that this report has not been made available to any government agencies, which is, I think, alarming. But a Republican advisor to you during your tenure at the organization who read the report stated, and I quote, "I watched him run an organization very poorly, lose the confidence of donors. The organization ultimately folded and was forced to merge with another organization who individuals felt could run and manage funds on behalf of donors more responsibly than he could. I don't know how he's going to run an organization with an $857 billion budget and 3 million individuals." And that is the only comment we've had and the only access we've had to the forensic report. A similar thing happened with the Concerned Veterans for America, a second veterans group that you led from 2011 until 2016. During those 5 years, tax records show that the organization spent more than it raised. Just as troubling are reports that a significant amount of debt was incurred from social events and parties filled with excessive drinking and questionable personal behavior. Mr. Hegseth, I hope you will explain what actions you will take, if confirmed, to be a better steward of Defense Department's large budget. Finally, while I appreciate our meeting last week, it is unacceptable that you did not meet with any other Democratic members of this committee before this hearing, as has been our bipartisan tradition. During my time in the Senate, I have voted for and worked closely with Secretaries of Defense appointed by Republican presidents. While we may disagree politically, there was always an understanding that rank partisanship should have no place when it comes to providing for the men and women who serve in uniform. And Mr. Hegseth, I am troubled by the many comments you have made both as a commentator and in your published writings. For example, in your book, American Crusade, you wrote, quote, "Modern leftists who represent the soul of the modern Democratic Party literally hate the foundational ideas of America." You also wrote, "The other side, the left, is not our friend. We are not esteemed colleagues, nor mere political opponents. We are foes. Either we win or they win. We agree on nothing else." Mr. Hegseth, if confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you would lead an organization that, like the country it represents, is composed of Democrats and Republicans. Yet your language suggests that you regard many of these men and women as foes. And I would ask you to explain why service members and civilians who do not share your political opinions can trust that they will not be targeted during your tenure. Indeed, the challenge of the Secretary of Defense is to remove partisan politics from the military. You propose to inject it. This would be an insult to the men and women who have sworn to uphold their own apolitical duty to the Constitution. Mr. Hegseth, you are the 9th nominee for Secretary of Defense that I've had the honor to consider as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have voted in favor of all your predecessors, including those in the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, you lack the character and composure and competence to hold the position of Secretary of Defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. And now it's my privilege and honor and pleasure to recognize two witnesses who have come forward to introduce our nominee. First, I recognize my former colleague and former Senator Norm Coleman of Minnesota for the purpose of an introduction. Norm, we are glad to see you and glad to have you back, and you are recognized for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, my former colleagues. I'm honored to introduce a son of Minnesota to you, Pete Hegseth. As a senator from Minnesota, I spent many hours with this young man as he walked the halls of Congress advocating on behalf of America's veterans. And he is young in the best sense of the word. He is strong, focused, intelligent, incisive, a great listener, and is almost supernaturally energetic, just what we need in a Secretary of Defense in times of massive change. He is the real deal. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a writer in my city of St. Paul, and said the problem with America is that there are no second acts. He was wrong. Pete was a brave soldier, has been an able communicator, and I believe is about to begin a great second act as our Secretary of Defense. He has struggled and overcome great personal challenges. Please don't give into the cynical notion that people can't change. We need the ones who can change to lead us, to be beacons of hope, and to remind us that grace can lead us home. 4 years ago, President Biden's nominee, Lloyd Austin, a good and honorable man, received 97 votes on the floor of the Senate. And we went through the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Putin invaded Ukraine. The Houthis endanger our shipping lanes. We witnessed Israeli miracles against America's enemies in the Middle East, where the United States was more of an impediment than a help. Our recruitment numbers have sunk dramatically, and our southern border has suffered a slow but dangerous invasion. Yes, Pete Hegseth is an out-of-the-box nominee, and I say it's high time to get out of the box. One more thought. The country longs for a government of less division and more respect and dignity. My hope is that this committee hearing provides what they are asking for. Disagree? Yes. Strongly if necessary. But then come together to support the nominee, this nominee, Pete Hegseth, of the one president we have at a time, laying aside partisan politics for the essential mission of national security upon which everything else depends. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Norm. I do appreciate that and appreciate your presence today. I now have the honor and pleasure of introducing Congressman Waltz. I understand, Congressman, you are still a member of the House for another day or two.
Another day or two.
Okay, and I now recognize Congressman Waltz for whatever opening statement and introduction he might make.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, and Chairman has a very nice ring to it, so congratulations, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today and urge the members of this committee to confirm Pete Hegseth as our next Secretary of Defense. And I'm not here today just to advocate on behalf of a future colleague, but to speak on behalf of someone I consider a dear friend for over a decade now. Like Pete, I served in the U.S. Army. Like Pete, I'm a veteran. We deployed to Afghanistan and all over the world at the height of the war on terror, which is the war of our generation. And like thousands of other warfighters, we've witnessed the hardships of war. We've experienced the loss of friends in combat. We've endured too much time away from family and friends, and no one, I can promise you this, no one hates war more than those who have had to go fight it. No one does. Pete's story, though, isn't that much different from the millions of other veterans, and they know it, and they appreciate him for the experiences that he's gone through. And after our country was brutally attacked on 9/11, Pete Hegseth answered the call of duty like so many others. He put the interests of this country ahead of his own. And I can tell you firsthand, as can the heroes sitting in this audience behind me, Pete's character of country, his selflessness, his duty. These are the key tenets that have shaped him into the leader that he is today. These are the traits that President Trump recognized when making the decision to nominate Pete for this critical role. He will bring the perspective of being the first Secretary of Defense to have served as a junior officer on the front lines, not in the headquarters, on the front lines in the war on terror, and recognizes the human costs, the financial costs, and the policy drift that was discussed often in this very room that led us to decades and decades of war. So not only does he understand the threats he faces, but as the chairman mentioned, he is brilliant, in my mind, at communicating those to the American people in a way that is often not communicated in Washington, D.C., to reach out to the American people so that they understand why the military needs to do what it needs to do. And look, I have no doubt that he is going to get the Pentagon back to its primary mission, lethal readiness. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will respect. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will fear. And it's that warrior ethos that will keep the peace. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in my humble opinion, our military deserves better than it's getting. Our country faces a devastating recruitment crisis. Men and women are not volunteering to serve at the levels required. Our readiness is down. Our costs are up. And it seems like nearly every major weapon system, again, often discussed in this very room, is costing too much, delivering too little, and taking way too long. The bottom line is the status quo is unacceptable. It's not working. And the members of this committee, you all know it. You know it's not working. And the members of the House Armed Services know it's not working. And we have hearing after hearing, year after year. And here we are decades later describing the same problems. The Pentagon has continuously failed audits. The businesses that want to do business with the Pentagon have to pass an audit, but the entity itself fails an audit. Innovation is stalled, morale is down, standards have been weakened, and meritocracy is less valued. And as a result, our adversaries have been emboldened all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for change. It is time for change. You all have literally seen thousands of veterans, as the chairman cited one amazing Medal of Honor recipient. But we have seen thousands of veterans expressing their support for Pete. This is a man who can reinvigorate that warrior ethos, and this is a man that will lead. I can't imagine having a more capable partner in my position as National Security Advisor. Pete is a man of family, of faith, and he's committed to making our country strong again. And most importantly, and brother, I know this in my core, he will always have as a first principle the service members that are out there on the front lines for all of us at the heart of every decision he makes. So, senators, I urge you to support this confirmation. It is critical that President Trump has his national security team in place for the challenges ahead, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your testimony, and I'm guessing that each and every member of this committee will want to have you on speed dial for the next few years. So thank you both. Our two guests may stay, or I know they have other engagements and responsibilities also, but thank you both for your testimony. At this point, Mr. Hegseth, I'm required to ask you as a nominee a series of questions that the committee asks all civilian nominees who appear before it. If you would, please simply respond in the affirmative or negative to each question. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes, sir.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No, sir.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes, sir.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes, sir.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, sir.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, sir.
All right. So at this point, Mr. Hegseth, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and all the members of this committee for this opportunity today. I'm grateful for and have learned a great deal from this advise and consent process. Our founders knew what they were doing. Should I be confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee, senators from both parties, to secure our nation. I want to thank the former senator from Minnesota, Norm Coleman, for his mentorship and friendship in this process, and the incoming National Security Advisor, Congressman, and more importantly for our purposes, Colonel Mike Waltz, for his powerful words. I'm grateful to them both. Thank you to my incredible wife, Jennifer, who has changed my life and been with me throughout this entire process. I love you, sweetheart, and I thank God for you. And as Jenny and I pray together every morning, all glory, regardless of the outcome, belongs to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. His grace and mercy abounds each day. May his will be done. Thank you to my father, Brian, and mother, Penny, as well as our entire family, including our 7 wonderful kids, Gunnar, Jackson, Peter Boone, Kensington, Luke, Rex, sorry, it's a lot of them, and Gwendolyn. Their future safety and security is in all of our hands. And to all the troops and veterans watching and here in the room, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, soldiers, pilots, sailors, Marines, Gold Stars, and more, too many friends to name. Officers, enlisted, black and white, young and old, men and women, all Americans, all warriors. This hearing is for you. Thank you for figuratively and literally having my back.
You are an assassin. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist, and you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their swift reaction to that outburst and state that similar interruptions will be treated in like manner. Mr. Hegseth, you may continue.
Well, as I'll say again, thank you for figuratively and literally having my back. I pledge to do the same for all of you. It's an honor to come before this committee today as President Donald Trump's nominee for the office of Secretary of Defense. 2 months ago, 77 million Americans gave President Trump a powerful mandate for change, to put America first, at home and abroad. I want to thank President Trump for his faith in me and his selfless leadership for our republic. The troops have no better commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. As I've said to many of you in private meetings, when President Trump chose me for this position, the primary charge he gave me was to bring the warrior culture back to the Department of Defense. He, like me, wants a Pentagon laser-focused on lethality, meritocracy, warfighting, accountability, and readiness.
When are you going to stop bombing babies in Gaza? Veterans are committed
You may continue, sir.
Returning the Pentagon back to warfighting, that's it. That's my job.
Mr. Hegseth, suspend your remarks. Let me just say this. The Capitol Police are going to remove immediately individuals that are disrupting the hearing. I see a pattern attempted to be inflicted on the committee, and we're simply not going to tolerate that. You may proceed.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members. Mr. Hegseth, you may.
The strength of our military is our unity and our shared purpose, not our differences. Number two, we're going to rebuild our military, always matching threats to capabilities. This includes reviving our defense industrial base, reforming the acquisitions process. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, no more valley of death for new defense companies, modernizing our nuclear triad, ensuring the Pentagon can pass an audit, and rapidly fielding emerging technologies. And number three, we're going to reestablish deterrence. First and foremost, we will defend our homeland, our borders, and our skies. Second, we will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the Communist Chinese. And finally, we will responsibly end wars to ensure that we prioritize our resources to reorient to larger threats. We can no longer count on reputational deterrence. We need real deterrence. The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals, will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. We are not Republicans. We are not Democrats. We are American warriors. Our standards will be high, and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapons system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. This has been my focus ever since I first put on the uniform as a young Army ROTC cadet at Princeton University in 2001. I joined the military because I love my country and felt an obligation to defend it. I served with incredible Americans in Guantanamo Bay, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and on the streets of Washington, D.C., many of which are with me here today. This includes enlisted soldiers I helped become American citizens, and Muslim allies I helped immigrate from Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I took off the uniform, my mission never stopped. Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win, and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled the trigger down range, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now. Ask anyone who's ever worked for me or with me. I know what I don't know. My success as a leader, and I very much look forward to discussing my organization's successes at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done. But my success as a leader has always been setting a clear vision, hiring people smarter and more capable than me, empowering them to succeed, holding everyone accountable, and driving toward clear metrics. Build the plan, work the plan, and then work harder than everyone else around you. I've sworn an oath to the Constitution before, and if confirmed, I will proudly do it again. This time, for the most important deployment of my life. I pledge to be a faithful partner to this committee, taking input and respecting oversight. We share the same goals: a ready, lethal military, the health and well-being of our troops, and a strong and secure America. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hegseth. Before we begin with member questions, I would like to remind my colleagues that, consistent with the bipartisan staff agreement from December, and in concert with exactly how this committee dealt with the last Secretary of Defense nominee, each member will be recognized for one round of 7 minutes to question the nominee. Out of respect for the time of all members of this committee, the time limits will be tightly enforced. We've now been here 45 minutes, and I think we've done very well with the time. But at this point, I will begin my questioning of the nominee. Mr. Hegseth, you and your family have endured criticism of your nomination since it was announced in November. Let's get into this allegation about sexual assault, inappropriate workplace behavior, alcohol abuse, and financial mismanagement during your time as a nonprofit executive. I should note that the majority of these have come from anonymous sources in liberal media publications. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond to these allegations, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that opportunity. You are correct. We undertook this responsibility with an obligation to the troops to do right by them for our warfighters. And what became very evident to us from the beginning, there was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated in the media against us. That was clear from moment one. And what we knew is that it wasn't about me. Most of it was about President Donald Trump, who's had to endure the very same thing for much longer amounts of time. And he endured it in incredibly strong ways. So we, in some ways, knew it was coming. We didn't understand the depth of the dishonesty that would come with it. So from story after story in the media, left-wing media, we saw anonymous source after anonymous source based on second or third-hand accounts. And time again, stories would come out, and people would reach out to me and say, you know, I've spoken to this reporter about who you really are, and I was willing to go on the record. But they didn't print my quote. They didn't print any of my quotes. Or, I've worked with you for 10 years, or I was your accountant, or I was your chief operating officer, or I was your board member, or I was with you on 100 different tour stops for Concerned Veterans for America. No one called me. No one asked about your conduct on the record or off the record. Instead, a small handful of anonymous sources were allowed to drive a smear campaign, an agenda about me, because our left-wing media in America today, sadly, doesn't care about the truth. All they were out to do, Mr. Chairman, was to destroy me. And why do they want to destroy me? Because I'm a change agent and a threat to them, because Donald Trump was willing to choose me, to empower me, to bring the Defense Department back to what it really should be, which is warfighting. So I'm willing to endure these attacks. But what I will do is stand up for the truth and for my reputation. False attacks, anonymous attacks, repeated ad nauseum, printed as nauseum, as facts. We have provided to the committee, Mr. Chairman, and I know you're going to share, on-the-record statement after on-the-record statement from people who have served with me, worked with me at Fox News, Concerned Vets, Vets for Freedom, you name it, from the top of the chain to the bottom, who will say, I treat them with respect, with kindness, with dignity. That's men, that's women, that's black, that's white, that's every background. I have prided myself as a leader of respecting people, being professional. That is the balance of mine. I'm not a perfect person, as has been acknowledged. Saved by the grace of God, by Jesus and Jenny. I'm not a perfect person, but redemption is real. And God forged me in ways that I know I'm prepared for. And I'm honored by the people standing and sitting behind me, and look forward to leading this Pentagon on behalf of the warfighters.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. And frankly, I'm sure there are millions of Americans watching who would agree that they've experienced that same sort of redemption. So I do appreciate that. I realize that it involves a little bearing of the soul, but thank you for that. Now let's talk about top-line defense spending. I have a plan. I think you've read it. I issued another plan, Freedom's Forge, which you've also had a chance to look at. And you have noted correctly that the current trend line of defense spending falling below 3% of our GDP is a threat to national security. You also said building the strongest and most powerful military in the world must be done responsibly, but it cannot be done on the cheap. You still agree with that, do you not?
Yes, sir, I do.
Tell us what you think about, particularly about my plan to make the Defense Department less bureaucratic, less top-heavy, cut out some of the bureaucracy and layers, make it more friendly to startups and to new ideas, contained in my 20 or so page white paper, Defending Freedom's Forge.
Senator, I've had a chance to review the Forged Act, that paper. Those are precisely the kinds of ideas that need to be pursued. And I look forward to working with this committee to ensure we cut the red tape, we incentivize innovation, we rebuild the defense industrial base, cut out the bureaucracy, all the things that are preventing the platforms and the tools from getting rapidly from our great defense companies here that should, and those that want to compete, into the hands of warfighters. But past his prologue on this, sir, and I would just look at what President Trump did after the drawdowns of lead from behind under President Obama. President Trump rebuilt our military. He didn't start wars, he ended them, and he didn't allow wars to start on his watch. We've had the same kind of defense cuts under the Biden administration. And so, look, I would present to the committee the reputation of President Donald Trump and me coming alongside him to ensure we have peace through strength by rebuilding our military, investing as necessary. Going under 3%, Mr. Chairman, is very dangerous.
Okay, we've got 45 seconds. Tell us, in that point, get us started at least talking about deterring China and the Indo-Pacific.
It starts with priorities. The 2017 National Defense Strategy was the first step in reorienting away from simply entanglement in the Middle East, which our generation knows a lot about, and reorienting the behemoth that is the Pentagon toward new priorities, specifically the Indo-Pacific. So that strategy has started and was barely followed through on under the Biden administration. So we're going to start by ensuring the institution understands that as far as threats abroad, the CCP is front and center, also obviously defending our homeland as well.
Thank you very much, Senator Reid. You're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questioning, I would like to make 3 requests. First, many of my members would like a second round. That has been the custom Senator Hagel was afforded 3 rounds. Senator Ash Carter, 2 rounds. And that was done by a Republican chairman with the consent and the appropriate guidance of Democrats. I must say, too, my recollection is I've never denied anyone the opportunity to ask the second round of questions as I chaired. I would request the second round. And my time is running. I think these are administrative.
Oh, yeah, you're using your time. No, if the timekeeper will pause the time. I must say, I think we're going to have adequate time for questioning. And I know Democrat members have coordinated their questions as much as we have, and we are following the same exact precedent on all things that we did with Secretary Austin. So I respectfully understand what you're saying, but I think we have an agreement. It's been known for quite some time, and I intend to stick with that agreement which we made last December. What is your second request?
Second, as been publicly reported, you and I have both seen the FBI background investigation of Mr. Hegseth. And I want to say for the record, I believe the investigation was insufficient, frankly. There are still FBI obligations to talk to people. They have not had access to the forensic audit, which I referenced to, and the person who had access to was quite critical of Mr. Hegseth. And I think people on both sides have suggested that they get the report. I know your colleagues have asked for it. Senator Thune assured me personally that he thought it was an appropriate idea. So I would ask, and I would say, too, as a precedent, one of President Trump's appointees had similar, very complicated personal issues. The report was made available to all the members of the committee. We would be following precedent, and I ask that that be made possible.
Again, there's been much discussion about this, and what I intend to do is follow the exact precedent that we've had for the last 2 hearings with regard to secretaries of defense. Not only Secretary Austin, but Secretary Mattis 8 years ago. And that was for the chair and the ranking member to see the report. And so that is my intention as chair of this committee.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, I have several letters that I would include for the record. One from Count Every Hero, which is an organization of retired 4-star generals and former secretaries of defense that is critical of the proposed purge panels. One from an organization for domestic violence. One for a Council on American Relations. And also several letters that raise questions. I would ask they be submitted for the record.
Without objection, they will be submitted. And Mr. Reed, your time has now expired. Just kidding. Yeah. You're recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you. You're a very understanding chairman. I like that. I like that. Ms. Hegseth, you've written, and it's quote, "Oh yeah, and fire any general who hasn't carried water for Obama and Biden's extra constitution and agenda-driven transformation for our military. Clean house and start over." It's come to my attention that current serving military personnel have received emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DOD policies. One mail that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean house," reminiscent of your specific comment, states, and I quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous, liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name into the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to collect your military requirement," end quote. Now, I want to remind everyone that these policies that are being referred to date back decades, to the 1940s and 50s, with respect to racial discrimination particularly, and administrations of both parties, including the Trump administration and their first party, caused those policies to be enforced. Mr. Hegseth, are you aware of these emails being sent to officers?
Senator, you mentioned the word accountability, which is something we have not had for the last 4 years.
Are you aware of these messages being sent to officers?
Certainly, I'm not aware of that. It's not one of my efforts, but there's been no accountability for the disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
You've written publicly that DI policy is a distraction and have military personnel walking on eggshells. Do you believe that emails like that are essentially threatening both a serving officer and a spouse and is claiming that they'll lose their pension will have a distraction and detract from the lethality?
Senator, you mentioned the 40s and 50s, and you're precisely right. The military was a forerunner in courageous racial integration in ways no other institutions were willing to do. I served with men and women of all backgrounds because of the courage of people decades and decades ago. Incredibly important. However, the DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military and would undercut readiness, undercut retention, because I can see officers receiving these emails beginning to wonder very seriously if they should continue. Let me change subject for a moment here. You've been instrumental in securing pardons for several convicted war criminals. In at least two of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes, rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, there was evidence withheld. There was prosecutorial misconduct. And as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the second guessers in air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me.
I look case by case and was proud to work with President Trump to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted, but charges lingered. Yes, regardless of where those convening authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir,
Why not?
because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Reid.
you very much.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Hegseth, to you and to your family. Thank you for the meeting that we had. We talked about a number of things. First and foremost was that nuclear weapons are foundational to our national defense, and having a safe, effective, and credible nuclear deterrent underpins our alliances, and as you know, it deters our adversaries. Nuclear deterrence has been, and you and I believe, agreed on this, it must continue to be unequivocally the highest priority mission of the Department of Defense. But deterrence only works if our adversaries believe our nuclear forces are effective and credible. All three legs of our triad are undergoing that generational recapitalization programs, and we cannot afford any more delays in those programs. Sir, do you believe and agree with President Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review that preventing adversary nuclear attacks is, quote, the highest priority of the United States?
Senator, yes, I do.
If confirmed, will you commit to supporting all three legs of the nuclear triad and to using every tool available to deliver these systems on schedule?
Senator, yes, I do, because ultimately our deterrence, our survival is reliant upon the capability, the perception, and the reality of the capability of our nuclear triad. We have to invest in its modernization for the defense of our nation.
While former secretaries of defense have stated that nuclear deterrence is the highest priority, we haven't really seen that translated into budget requests or using the tools like the Defense Production Act. You've spoken about increasing lethality. You've spoken about getting programs done faster. How would you actually implement a culture change so that we can see these delivery schedules move forward, be rewarded? I can tell you in most every briefing we have, the schedules we're on are too late. So what would you do?
Well, ultimately focused first on the things that are most important, as we have discussed, Senator, the nuclear triad, understanding whether it's the B-21 or the Minuteman to the Sentinel, all aspects, or the Columbia-class submarines, ballistic missiles. What are the priorities that need to be focused on and ensure that in those particular cases, you mentioned it, Senator, the Defense Production Act, emergency powers. If we're at a place where our nuclear capabilities are perceived to not be what they are, that is an emergency. And we have an ally in our incoming commander-in-chief, in President Donald Trump, who has spoken about these things, understands the power and strength of nuclear deterrence, will not allow them to be deprioritized.
It's the existential threat. It's the existential threat to this nation. How do you change the culture? It's not just the Production Act that's going to be able to do it. How are you going to move forward faster?
Competition, Senator, is important, critically important. The Death Valley that was talked about, leveraging the innovation of Silicon Valley, which for the first time in generations has shown a willingness, desire, and capability to bring its best technologies to bear at the Pentagon, a Pentagon that has become too insular, tries to block new technologies from coming in. So we have to embrace that, there's some great Office of Strategic Capital, DIU initiatives that provide loans to companies to participate, because you have to invest in the defense industrial base for the longer term projects. We have the capability, the missiles and the munitions, but also to rapidly field emerging technologies that we need on the battlefield right now. So as we learn things, say in the war in Ukraine, those technologies, as we look at threats we're going to face find ways to rapidly field those using off-the-shelf technologies or standard designs, modular designs. Another easy one, Senator, that became evident in the process is digital designs. The Pentagon often builds entire systems without first using a digital design, which means you build prototypes and then scrap them and start over again. No private sector business could survive doing business that way. So there's a lot of innovation, and I'm going to hire a lot of smart people already have to help with that.
In the 2025 NDAA, it was established to a new position, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Deterrence, Chemical and Biological Defense Policy and Programs. And that was established so we could cut through a lot of the bureaucratic stovepipes that we see in the office of the Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, will you direct the Department of Defense components to expeditiously implement this reform?
It sounds, I would want to look directly at exactly what that reform is.
It is
I take your word that it's great, Senator. I will review it robustly, and I look forward to implementing it.
Okay, thank you. During the first Trump administration, the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review concluded that the U.S. needed to once again develop and deploy a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile known as SLCM to offset significant Russian and Chinese advantages in theater-range nuclear capabilities. Since then, Congress, on a strong bipartisan basis, has directed the Navy and the National Nuclear Security Administration to continue this effort. Do you support the SLCM program?
As of right now, Senator, based on what I know, I do. But one of my answers I'll have repeatedly throughout this morning is getting an opportunity to look under the hood, classified material, get an understanding of true capabilities vis-a-vis enemy capabilities. Because what we know right now on the nuclear, Senator, what I know on the nuclear side is that Russia and China are rushing to modernize and build arsenals larger than ours. We need to match threats to capabilities, and the systems we elevate will be tied to whether those capabilities are needed based on the adversaries we face.
Would you ensure that this program is executed according to law?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Senator.
What, short here, what is your plan to revitalize the industrial base in this country?
Needs to be real short.
Real short.
Serious investment targeted at systems that we truly need by also incentivizing competition and laser focus from the OSD, from the Office of Secretary of Defense, to all the particular strategic initiatives to revive them so it's not just one system, it's multiple systems.
You may want to expand on that on the record. At this point,
Thank you.
my colleagues, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter organized by a group called Flag Officers for America, which has 120 retired generals and admirals offering their support for Mr. Hegseth's nomination. I ask unanimous consent. Without objection, it is entered into the record. Senator Shaheen.
Good morning, Mr. Hegseth.
Good morning, Senator.
I was pleased when I was contacted on your behalf about meeting before this hearing. I've been on this committee since 2011, and during that time, I voted to confirm 6 nominees to be Secretary of Defense from 3 administrations, 2 Democratic and 1 Republican, the first Trump administration. Every one of those nominees met with me and my Democratic colleagues on this committee before the hearing. So, as you can imagine, I was disappointed when no one ever followed up. When we followed up with your office, you were not able to meet. Do you understand that if you're confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, that you will have a responsibility to meet with all members of this committee, not just Republicans?
Senator, I very much appreciate and understand the traditionally bipartisan nature of this committee. Their national defense is not partisan. It should not be about Republicans or Democrats. And so I look forward to working together with you and your colleagues on priorities facing this nation. Yes?
I think we would expect that. And one reason that I wanted to meet with you was because I thought it would be really helpful to better understand your views on women in the military. Because you've made a number of surprising statements about women serving in the military. As recently as November the 7th of 2024 on the Sean Ryan Show, you said, and I quote, "I'm straight up saying that we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective." The quote went on a little longer, but that was the gist of it. That was before you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Mr. Hegseth, do you know what percentage of our military is comprised of women?
I believe it's 18 to 20%, Senator.
It's almost 18%. And in fact, DOD's 2023 demographic report indicated that there are more women serving now and there are fewer separations. So they make up a critical part of our military. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am. Women in our military, as I have said publicly, have and continue to make amazing contributions across all aspects of our battlefield.
Well, you also write in your book, The War on Warriors, with the chapter, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, that, quote, "Not only are women comparatively less effective than men in combat roles, but they are more likely to be objectified by the enemy and their own nation in the moral realms of war." Mr. Hegseth, should we take it to believe that you believe that the two women on this committee who have served honorably and with distinction made our military less effective and less capable?
I'm incredibly grateful for the two women who've served our military in uniform and including in the Central Intelligence Agency, contributions on the battlefield, indispensable contributions. Senator, I would like to clarify, when I'm talking about that issue, it's not about the capabilities of men and women, it's about standards. And this committee has talked a lot about standards. Standards that we, unfortunately, over time, have seen eroded in certain duty positions, certain schools, certain places, which affects readiness, which is what I care about the most, readiness on the battlefield.
I appreciate that.
And so my comments point time and time again to standards.
Your statements publicly have not been to that effect. After your nomination, you did state to a group of reporters that you, quote, "support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe, including combat." So what I'm confused about, Mr. Hegseth, is which is it? Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks if on the one hand you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect, just like every man and woman in uniform, just like the men and women that I've worked with in my veterans organizations, to include when I was a headquarters and headquarters company commander in the Minnesota National Guard.
Well, I appreciate your 11th hour conversion, but Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to submit Chapter 5, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, for the record. Mr. Hegseth.
Without objection, it will be submitted.
Are you familiar with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda at the Department of Defense?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
This is a law that was signed during President-elect Trump's first term. It was legislation that I sponsored with Republican Senator Capito of West Virginia. It was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, the nominee to be the President-elect's Secretary of State. It was led in the House of Representatives by Kristi Noem, the President-elect's nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. It mandates that women be included in all aspects of our national security, including conflict resolution and peace negotiations. And at the Department of Defense, it has been the law for 8 years under both the Trump and Biden administrations. The DOD has incorporated women throughout its decision-making as a result. Every single combatant commander across 2 administrations has told this committee that this law and its implementation at the Department of Defense provides them a strategic advantage operationally. Based on your comments, it appears that the example that you would like to set, not only for women in this country, but for women across the globe, 50% of the world's population, as the prospective nominee to lead the most combat-credible military in the entire world, is that women should not have an equal opportunity in our military. So will you commit to preserving the Women, Peace, and Security law at DOD and including in your budget the requisite funding to continue to restore and resource these programs throughout the DOD?
Senator, I will commit to reviewing that program and ensuring it aligns with America First national security priorities, meritocracy, lethality, and readiness. And if it advances American interests, it's something we would advance. If it doesn't, it's something we would look at.
Since former President Trump signed the law, I hope that he agrees with you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 5 letters of support from female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These women represent diverse viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. Hegseth and comment on his focus on merit, warfighting readiness, military training status, and the warrior ethos. So without objection, it will be entered into the record. And now I'm honored to recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers